theme of International Women's Day this year is inspiring inclusion. Inspire inclusion even. But historically, things have changed. When we look back, previous years' themes were things like pledge for parity, be bold for change, press for progress, balance for better. These were all kind of, they all sound like quite forceful actions. They're, break, challenge, press, be bold. But also they highlight inequalities, bias, equal, better, progress, change. And I kind of look at those and I think, well, what were the outcomes? Were they to recruit women to the cause? Well, a call to arms even maybe, to raise awareness of the barriers and the experiences that you have, so maybe to hold men accountable and responsible, and exclude and alienate them. We've moved on. Previous year and this year's themes, embrace equity and inspire inclusion, seem to mean and recognise that this is about all of us. It's not about men and women. It is about all of us and the fact that we progress together. Tonight's theme, though, talks about, technology. Talks about busting stereotypes. This is my mum and dad on their wedding day, 1957, 1st of March, 1957. And it was a day that was profound in their lives. It changed their lives, unlike couples getting married today. Looking at it from my mother's perspective, it was the day her career ended, because she had an employment contract that had a marriage bar in it. She was working for a big high street bank that's now called HSBC, that was in the day called Midland. So the day she got married, she lost her job. But also she was expected, society, stereotypes said that she was then expected to become the homemaker, the cook, the cleaner, the mother. Mother probably meant quite a little different things in 1957 to what it means today. And the societal expectations of the time were that she'd become a carer, that she'd look after the domestic issues, that she'd be obedient, grateful, subservient, emotional, loyal. All things that I associate more with my father. He was all those things, not my mother. But he wasn't allowed to be those things because his life changed that day as well. He went from being a single man to being a husband, where he was expected to be the provider, the head of the household, the protector, the father, whatever father meant in those days. He wasn't, by the way, allowed when I was born in 1960, a few years after their wedding, he wasn't allowed anywhere near the hospital. He was excluded. I was one of the first generations to be there when my children were born. What a great privilege that was. Today, young men have got the ability to take paternity leave. Why don't they? Why don't they? Let's bust those stereotypes. But my father was expected to be strong, successful, knowledgeable, unemotional, leader, resilient. All things that I associate more with my mother than my father. But that's where society placed them, and those are outdated, old-fashioned stereotypes. Now, thankfully, if we move on to today, I think, over the last 60 or so years since they got married, women have cut the apron strings of complying with these outdated female stereotypes. They can now choose to be who they want to be. They can be great leaders like Julia and Kirsty and Maggie. They can be top of their careers. They can be astronauts. They can create vaccines to save us from COVID. Airline pilots. They can be sports stars. They have the opportunity and choice to be working mothers, like many of you may be, or even stay-at-home mothers. Or even, that's not particularly good wording, is it? They can be stay-at-home mothers. You have the choice and the opportunity to be who you want to be. Maybe the only things that are getting in your way are men. And I would say that because I believe that actually not enough men have grasped the opportunities and the choices that are now being put in front of them, because they are still complying by and large with outdated male stereotypes. An example, men not taking maternity leave in big enough numbers. Yeah. Men still complying with being strong and bold and all of those other things. And that's restricting us. And in so much of my work, and I can't go through all of these stories, what I see is men breaking free of them. If men break free of these things and take off our straitjackets of complying with these stereotypes, I think the world would be a better place for everybody. And we need to inspire men to do that. That's what inspire inclusion means to me. Thank you.
Just to give you a little bit of flavour of my career, I've been in financial technology for over 30 years. I've worked in Hong Kong and Tokyo and London. I've worked for big banks like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs and HSBC. And I am currently focused with Next Wave Consulting on helping the asset and wealth sectors modernise. Next Wave Consulting was set up just before the pandemic, and the name, we didn't know it was a pandemic when we called it Next Wave, so and there's no strategy book that says start a new company just before a global pandemic and see how it goes. But anyway, we managed to survive, and I'm very, very proud of myself and the founders and the other partners that we were listed as the 13th fastest growing company in the UK in 2023 in the Sunday Times Fast Track indices. And also we got voted in the top 10 best loved medium-sized companies. So, testament to a lot of hard work. And I will say I'm the only female partner in London as well. So. Yeah, fantastic journey. There are only, I think when you look at entry levels for women into financial services technology, it's quite good. I think the graduate recruitment schemes are getting a lot better at, that kind of diversity drive and trying to take equal numbers. It drops off rapidly till it gets to about 10% when they get to C levels. Now, it may be 8%, 10%, 15%, because it does vary by country, whether you're in a bank or a fintech or you're working for a product company. But trust me, I sit in most meetings every day and I am the only woman there. So I just wanted to sort of move on to where we are in 2024. And as I was preparing for this panel and thinking about what to say, a friend of mine asked me a question. She said, well, I said, what, I've been speaking, how should I approach this? And she said, well, let me ask you a question. Do you ever feel disadvantaged in the workplace because of your gender? And I pondered my reply in a politically correct, various experiences, scenarios, reasoning ran through my head. In the end, I simply said, yes. That's the simple answer to that question. And on a good day, I feel really upbeat about the changes and improvements over the last 30 years. No doubt there's been some great stuff done, but catch me on a bad day, and I have a few of those, and it feels like sometimes progress has been too slow. Now, legislation has taken care of some of the core issues. The Equality Act in 2010 addresses, the sort of, I would say, the foundational structural issues of equal pay, discrimination, harassment, victimization, and more recently, the Worker Protection Bill. And these, are great, and they legislate, and that is that level of protection for everybody. What's much more difficult to address and legislate are the behaviours that are unconscious, and people are deliberately doing some of these things, but it's gender stereotyping that's been conditioned right the way from almost birth. And so there's so much of this unconscious behaviours that go on. That is much, you can't really legislate for that. And it's in all of us. I mean, I think, it's women to men and men to women. It's not a one way. We all have unconscious biases. But they have the potential for enormous impact on people in the workplace in terms of self-esteem, confidence, the sense of power and self-worth. And so this is reflected in recent research and headlines, and I pulled out just a few. Now, I think all of these are from 2024. And the one that I think is most concerning is a piece of research that is just published, carried out by the Policy Institute at King's College and Ipsos, the survey company. And that findings concluded that boys and men from the Gen Z generation are more likely than the older baby boomers to believe that feminism has done more harm than good. And a fifth of men aged 16 to 29, this is the Gen Z sort of generation, who've heard of Andrew Tate, look favourably on him as a social media influencer. And then the third thing is 1 in 4 males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman. And this plays into some of the things that Mark was alluding to. So it's almost like the journey we've been on for gender parity and equality and equity. There seems to be a societal shift that's going on, and I don't think it's going to be a continued straight line from where we are now. Now, I would still say that there are larger, even in this survey, there are large proportions of young men still think it's harder to be a woman today than a man, that feminism has done more good than harm, and they have an unfavourable view of Andrew Tate. But it is worrying that this consistent minority of between 1/5 and 1/3 who hold the opposite view to that. And this points to this real risk of fractious divisions coming from this coming generation as they get into the workplace and start to have influence. So that's all right. I mean, it's all right saying, as I had a boss that used to say to me, don't tell me what the issues are, tell me what the solution is. It used to infuriate me because kind of needed to get the issues off my chest first, sort of. But if someone, a CEO of an organisation, said to me, "Okay, fine, but what would you advise we do then? How can you help us address these issues and make a real difference? So in 5-10 years' time, we look back and say there has been a difference." Well, obviously, the first thing I'd do was encourage everyone to do the Men for Inclusion training. So that's a given. It is fabulous, actually, the training, and it is addressed at the leadership teams, the male leadership teams, and talking to them on their terms. So I can't recommend that enough. And the other thing is, I've always said, when it comes to eliminating gender bias, I love this expression. I didn't make up. I can't remember who did. Who came up with it, but you can't be what you can't see. So for young women, if they can't see a role model, it's very hard for them to aspire to it. So as women progress in their career, I really encourage them to be visible and speak out. And that's almost difficult for women, because we were speaking earlier that confidence, in order to be visible and speak out, you need that confidence. And I think a lot of young women are not taught. Confidence can be taught. They're not taught that and don't have those inherent skills, but we need them to be visible in those roles of influence. We need more male allies, absolutely. I would encourage all organisations to identify, train and empower these allies. In my experience, having a male ally on your side is the most powerful leveler for any woman in a conflict situation. Just having that man who's got your back to say, no, I agree, that's not right. That behaviour is not right, and I saw it, and we should do something about it. Rather than you saying, I didn't like the way that person behaved, We also need to continue to put a gender lens on systems and structures, look again at default strategies and frameworks. I don't know if any of you have read the book Invisible Women by Caroline Perez. She points to an example of, I think it was Sweden, where they had a way of clearing the snow when there was a downpouring of snow, and they'd always clear the main routes first and then the pavements and side routes. And they found actually that if they put the gender lens on, more women were using the pavements and sidewalks and more men were driving their car to work. And if they switched it round, they actually got less injuries, because the women were taking children and old women and, on these uncleared side works, and actually it ended up saving the council money, because the hospital intakes went down with people with broken legs and injuries from that. And so, I mean, that gender lens, as I say, it can benefit everyone. It's not about, we want it to be more, biased towards female. We're talking about looking at it so everyone in society has a fair lens. And I still think there are structures and frameworks in place in organisations that need a gender lens put on them. So we need to go around that again, and keep challenging language. You know, I'm in all meetings and they went, oh, he did this, him. It's all male pronouns on a lot of what they're saying. And I'm sorry, but language does matter. It does matter because it conditions the way that people think. And also we all need to call out behaviours when we see them. It's really difficult to call out behaviours for yourself. It sounds like you're complaining or, it feels a bit like the little girl saying, I didn't like the way that happened. But if we call it out for each other, then we've each other got each other's backs. And I mean women calling out when they see behaviour that's not conducive to a good workplace environment, and having male allies call that out as well. And that's the only way, because often it is an education thing. People are not meaning to do these sort of things to hurt or, make people lose confidence. It's often just about explaining to people the impact of what they say on the emotional body of someone else. And we all, I think in there's a nice of people want to knock emotions out of the workplace. I'm sorry, but we are emotional bodies and we bring our emotions to work. So, and men do as well, even though they're stereotyped that they're not supposed to, but they do, And finally, the final thing I wanted to say was to hire and encourage more women into careers in AI. It's a huge opportunity for gender bias and inclusion to accelerate towards elimination. It's also a huge opportunity to fall back many decades. The unintended consequences of not putting a gender lens on AI data, prompt engineering design, and models now can have long-term detrimental effects on progress in this area. And we could undo a lot of all the ground we've gained in the last, the last decade. So finally, just a word, what do I hope for the future? There is nothing, I think, that encourages creativity, innovation, enjoyment more than a feeling of being valued, belonging, and that your voice is being heard. And creating equality and equity and inspiring inclusion in the workplace will help achieve that. So we really are together strong. We are stronger, and we want to call all male allies out there. We really appreciate your support.
During this production, I've worked across mostly the technology and financial services industry, and as initially at the start of my career, a young Black man who hadn't been to university, who didn't have any contacts in the industry, falling into the world of technology, I think was a saving grace. And being in the position I'm in, and having worked across the companies I've worked with, I think if you were to kind of look at the stats that govern my progression, you'd say that a lot of the stats were against this, and this wasn't normal. And I think the ethos or the conversation I want to have tonight is about, I guess, the concept of normalcy and social norms. Now, if you want to kind of take a look at the wider picture, yes, we're here to talk about International Women's Day. We're here to talk about inspiring inclusion. And I think one of the key things behind inspiring inclusion has to be the concept of inspiration. Inspiring someone to do something causes them to question the very thing that they see as normal around them. And when we look at the figures, about a third of the population of people working in technology are women. Looking at across the overall space, if you want to get down into the intersectionalities, you see that for Black women working in technology, it drops down to 0.7% for Black women who work in technology, as opposed to 1.8% across the entire world of work in general. Someone mentioned before that you can't be what you can't see. And in a world where 0.7% of all the women working in the space of Black women, you tend to realize then that representation doesn't really occur. And at that point, how do we then justify any support we say we're going to offer to young Black women in this space, right? At its core, there's a lot of best intentions, but when, again, you jump into the stats across the wider world of work, you tend to see a lot of overrepresentation of women across what they call the 5 Cs. And I think these are the roles that are very undervalued, and career paths, again, very undervalued. So if you look at catering, cashiering, clerical work, caring, and cleaning, you tend to find that it's oversubscribed by women. You have an 88% representation of Afro-Caribbean women. The few men that are in those industries, hilariously, then tend to have the more senior positions with the higher paying salaries anyway, which then skews the gender pay gap even further, right? When we say that women aren't in the world of work or women aren't in technology, you tend to find again that naturally the the burden of care and the underpaid and unpaid labor falls again back onto women, which then really becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of not seeing yourself represented, not seeing it as a valuable career path, and again, other career paths seem to take precedence. Now, in my experience over the last 13, 14 years of work, I've seen people working here for about 30 years and I'm blown away by it. It's fantastic. I was fortunate to be in a position where in the matrix of teams reporting to me, I had an all-female team, a diverse team, and we were championing the team, saying this is fantastic. We've got a team of heavy hitters who are doing a lot of great work, putting in a lot of support, a lot of development. And their world of work required some escalations here and there, and I kept getting escalations from their world. And I was thinking, okay, maybe support I've put in place might not be working. Maybe I need to do more to support them by putting in training courses, by looking at how it can build the confidence of the people in the team who don't have the most experience. Only to then take a step back and realize that for their counterpart teams reporting into me, there were teams of males that wasn't having that same level of interaction with them. To then take another step back and have a wider look at the bigger picture, to realize that the reason why these conversations were happening wasn't because the team wasn't capable or they weren't being trained, but it was because a team of women reaching out into a wider technology department, which is 95% male, weren't getting the traction they get if their counterpart male would go out to those same teams and ask for support or ask for details on anything that needed to be resolved over the course of the day. So it's easy to say that, yes, we took decisive action, an all-male senior leadership team took action and spoke to the all-male escalation teams. However, that doesn't really look at the root of the issue because, again, it's rooted in the concept of the norm. Looking back at the stats, the norm would be that the stats favor male in senior positions, and in not questioning that, it's almost like we're accepting that, well, men are best suited for leadership, which, as we all understand, isn't always the case. Again, looking at the stats, you could say that men deserve higher salaries because the numbers back this. But again, it's if you can't see it, then how can you be in that position? So the role of allyship then comes into question because as allies and as self-proclaimed allies, trained allies, and people who want to support equality and equity, I think one of the key things we should be looking at is questioning those stats and questioning the implied norms behind it and asking ourselves the question, is it normal for men to earn more than women? Is it normal for women to be hitting that glass ceiling and not be put into the leadership positions, which then fuel that replication across the entire population? Is it normal that we're not actually solving the issues that we've been training people on and been paying lip service to? And I think if we can take a holistic approach and look at this situation, we can then be in a position where we can actually see and expand on the role of allyship. I think allyship in this context implies that in-group, not bound by the constraints that the out-group face. But then that comes with those implied biases, right? Of you can't necessarily understand the thing that you're not facing. So it's looking at it, understanding there's a problem, wanting to be in a position to fix the problem. But if you're not bound by the rules that the people you're trying to help out, how do you truly put yourself in a position to understand those barriers? And how do you effectively take action that have lasting impact? And I think in having these conversations with myself and with the wider groups, one of the key things that I probably will want to work towards finishing on, and it's a saying that a former coach of mine had. Usually he'd say this and make us run about a dozen laps, but it's a team is only as successful as its least motivated members, right? If we want to look at ourselves as a team, the gender split is near 50-50. So with a group with half of all of us so overwhelmingly facing odds, the question that we need to ask is, what are we doing to motivate that group? What are we doing as a group in general to work together to not only inspire that inclusion, but to work towards motivating people from the most deprived areas? Because again, if you take a socioeconomic glance at this, women from poor socioeconomic backgrounds faced even more insurmountable odds. So what are we doing socially to actually start addressing these issues, starting at grassroots level and working towards fixing and progressing people through the necessary stages? Now, we can say we'll promote more people, we can say we'll put more people in positions of power, but it doesn't address the equity issue. And I think if we're going to push the role of allyship and get it to achieve its core aims, then coming together and discussing is all well and good. But I think pushing it a step further and understanding what role our unconscious biases play here versus what we can do to actually consider a longer lasting fix would be a better solution for all involved. I've thrown a lot of questions out there, but I think to sum up, if we're to inspire inclusion, the key thing that we need to do in all this is to look to motivate, look to inspire the least motivated members of our team. And in this case, it's accepting that we're all in this together. And if we're to progress together, then we need to be doing a lot more than just putting short-term fixes on things. Thank you.